Hey, friends. I'm so excited about today's show. As you guys know, I've been born and raised in Minnesota, and I have followed this family for a long, long time. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today. And you know that I love you, ladies. Please stay. Please tune in because we have an exciting show for you today. We are with Sheryl Ramstad, and she wrote a book called Living Life Full Throttle. This is the sister of Congressman Jim Ramstad. Can't wait for you to hear her story. Let me tell you a little bit about Sheryl. Sheryl has survived, friends, get this, a catastrophic airplane crash, defying the odds when the doctors gave her less than 1% chance of surviving severe burns. Maybe you heard about it, maybe you remembered. It happened in St. Paul, after which she served as a judge after the crash for 14 years, adopted children, not just one, but several, from another country, ran marathons, took on the monumental task of managing Minnesota prisons. And you know, that's where my heart beats. Campaigned for public office, served in Governor Jesse Ventura's cabinet, and summited, get this, Mount Kilimanjaro. And as if her life hadn't been full enough, she has made the unconventional decision to return to college at the age of 62, earning master's and doctorate degrees and embarking on a new career full circle as a nurse after 37 years in the legal profession. Welcome, Sheryl Ramstad. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Thank you. It's my privilege and pleasure to be with you today, Shug.
You know, I read your book cover to cover, and I shared that with you a little bit earlier. I'm exhausted reading through what has happened in your life, looking at it through your eyes. And you know what I really appreciated about your writing style is that you are so descriptive. You didn't miss details. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you remember way back then? How do you remember all the details and all the smells and all the sights and sounds? And so I can't wait to dig in with you if I could. As I had mentioned to you, I have enough notes to go for like 5 different shows, but we're going to try to condense it down, hit the highlights. And friends, make sure that you try to pick up our book, Living Life Full Throttle with Sheryl Ramstad. So share with us a little bit briefly about your airplane crash and what happened.
Certainly. I was taking flying lessons, and I was scheduled for my first solo flight on the Saturday after the 4th of July in 1979. I was a federal prosecutor at the time, 29 years old, and I went to my flight instructor, and he and I went up in the plane and did a few touch and goes together. And then he got out and he said, "Okay, it's your turn," which meant that it was my time to take control of the airplane and
Sure.
do three touch and goes. And on the third one, I'd come in and land and I'd have soloed, which is a rite of passage for a new pilot. Well, the first two went flawlessly. I was over St. Paul's skyline. I was over the downtown area, the Mississippi River, I-94, and I was cleared for final, which meant I was about to come in for my final landing and get my status as a student pilot when the engine quit. All of a sudden, it was dead silence, and it started dropping. I think people have the conception that a plane will glide. Well, it doesn't. It just started going down. I looked down below me, and there was the Mississippi River, I-94, the state capitol, and a densely populated residential area. Truthfully, I didn't think I would survive, but I did not want to take others with me. So my goal was to find a place to put it down where I wouldn't go ripping through neighborhoods, hit the boats on the river, hit the cars, and I aimed for a schoolyard. Well, on the way down, I had about 20, 25 seconds. And on the way down, the wing of the plane was torn off by a power line, which then sprayed the whole cockpit with fuel. And it exploded, basically. The fuel tank exploded and caught the whole plane on fire. So when I hit the ground, it stopped at a tree. I was 10 feet from a woman sunbathing in her backyard. The,
Wow.
the door jammed and I couldn't get out. And so I thought, I'm in a human inferno. I've got to get out. And I tried to unlatch the door, and the crash had made the doors jam. And so I took all my body weight and threw it against the door that was on fire, climbed out. And as I was getting out of the plane, a man came over to me and helped me cross the street. And as it happened, I was across from a Catholic church where I collapsed on the sidewalk. The priest came out and gave me last rites.
Mm.
I was then taken to St. Paul, then called St. Paul Ramsey. It's now Regent's Hospital Burn Unit, which was about a half a mile from where I'd crashed, and spent the summer there, went through 7 major surgeries, was burned over 37% of my body. My hand was very badly burned from going through the side that the wing had been torn off. And the doctor was going to amputate it, and he knew I was a trial lawyer. And so he said, I just decided to slap some skin on and see if it'd stick. And fortunate for me, it did. But it was a long journey back. I spent 2 years in physical therapy and occupational therapy, had multiple surgeries, wore a full body suit, compression garment, um, jacket, gloves, tights for 2 years. And by the grace of God, lots of prayers.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll never forget what Governor Quee wrote me as I was lying in that hospital bed. He said, the Lord must have other things for you to do. And
Hmm.
that was a real motivator for me. So I was very fortunate that my life was spared when I was hospitalized, and the doctors um, discovered I had internal infection, peritonitis. Um, they looked at each other and shook their head in the operating room, and later shared with me that they gave me less than a 1% chance of surviving. They told my folks and my brother that I would be in the woods for 2 weeks. Well, that was doctor's lingo for I was on the verge between life and death. And I was out of it during that time. I was on a heavy duty antibiotic that ran 24/7. And fortunately for me, it arrested the infection and I was able to heal.
So tell me, how do you remember all the details of what happened?
You know, Shug, it's indelibly implanted in my mind. I remember everything. I remember as if it were yesterday. I remember the sense as I was climbing out of that burning cockpit. The neighborhood had gathered around and they were backing off from me as if I had some dreadful disease I was carrying. Um, but the one person who did come over to me, I remember his exact words. He said, I'm a commercial pilot. And he said, I just want you to know you did a good job of flying that plane, putting it down without killing yourself or killing others in our neighborhood. I remember hearing the people talking around me saying they felt their houses shake. They knew that the plane was coming down because it was propeller wasn't going around. And so they watched it. And I remember everything up to the point that I talked to the fire chief. He asked who my next of kin was, and I was concerned that he not call my folks because my folks had been very, very concerned about my flying. Just the day before, I'd been at the lake where my mom was saying, I'm so worried about you, and I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have you. And, I said, Mom, flying is safer than walking across the street. So one of the first things that came to my mind when I was lying there on the sidewalk and the fire chief came over is, please don't call my mother. Please call my brother Jim and let him talk to my parents and tell them what's going on. So, I remember the details until
Hmm.
I got to the burn unit or until I got to the ambulance took me to the hospital. And then I remember I was they were cutting off my clothing, what was left of it. And I remember somebody coming in and saying there was a St. Paul Pioneer Press reporter who wanted to come in with a photographer and take pictures. And I
Oh,
remember one of the people in the room saying, no, she doesn't have any time for that.
mm-hmm.
But then I kind of faded. And the next thing I recall was waking up in a burn unit with the 3 other patients in the beds because it was very crowded that summer. And I remember seeing my mother with her Bible open on her lap, and she had
Yeah.
fallen asleep. But she had flown down. My parents had chartered a plane to fly down from their lake cabin so that they could be at my bedside.
Oh man. You know, to see the photos that you posted in the burn unit, and first of all, I've got such respect after reading your book on the people who work in the burn unit. You talked about the smells and the sounds and what the patients have to go through, which is grueling. But what really struck me was the photos that you posted and how they pierced through your wrist, elevating your arms up. And you said you couldn't help but compare that situation to the nails through Christ's body during the crucifixion. Tell us how that felt.
It made the crucifixion very real to me because when I woke up from the surgery and saw these pins coming through my wrist on both sides, really the only time I'd ever seen that was when Christ was crucified. And I thought, you know, he's with me. Christ is with me, and I understand, and he lives again, and I'm going to make it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was actually um, eerie in a way, but it was also a moment of faith
Sure.
where I had the faith that I was going to make it through this ordeal.
And I believe you said in the book that they had to do that to help the skin grafts on the back of your shoulders heal. Is that correct? So
That
that
is
you're elevated.
Yeah,
Okay.
because otherwise if my shoulders had touched the sheets, the grafts would have slid and not taken. So they had to be completely immobile for 2 weeks. And it
Mm.
was really a long 2 weeks. I remember that very vividly because I had no use of my hands or no ability to do anything. As limited as my hands were at that time because of my burns, I still had the freedom of movement, but being pinned like that, I didn't have the freedom of movement at all.
I didn't know they did that kind of stuff. You know, you talked about your mother a lot. She sounds like she was just a saint. We have a lot of moms that listen to our show, and you talked about the encouragement that your mom gave you. Can you share a little bit about the importance of that?
Yes, my mother was a rock. She was a fierce advocate for me. And as a nurse now, I'm a firm believer that everyone needs an advocate when they're in a medical crisis. But she would sit beside the bed and take notes on a legal pad all day, questions she had, concerns she had, and then so that she could ask the doctors directly, she would post herself the next morning outside the men's room when they were making their rounds so that she could catch them and ask them questions. And she was a source of support. She got me at my first surgery, she bought me a charm holder, and the first charm on it was a cross. And she said every time that I would have to have a surgery or that there would be something um, that I was afraid of, she was going to add to that. And so she brought a wishbone and she brought, a number of different charms. And that was her way of just, she knew I loved jewelry and she knew that I loved meaning behind my jewelry. And that became very, very meaningful. She was, some people called her a force to be reckoned with because when a doctor, when a medical one of the medical residents came in toward the end. I had been able to have clear x-rays. One thing they worry about with burns is that, and when you're caught in a fire like that, is that you are going to get pneumonia. And sometimes that's really critical. And so I remember when this medical resident came in one Sunday morning and said, well, you may have dodged the bullet, but you're about to meet your maker.
I
And I
couldn't believe he said that.
No, I know. Well, it was a few hours before my mom was able to make it that morning. And when I told her that, she was just determined to get to the bottom of why he said it and what it meant. And so she sought out the head surgeon, who told her that the resident had no business saying that. He looked at the x-ray himself. He talked to the radiologist and he said, she doesn't have pneumonia. She's going to be okay. But my mother was the one who brought that news to me. In the meantime, I spent several hours thinking, I'm 29 years old. There's so much life I have left that I would love to live. I'd like to start a family. I, was at the age where my profession had been launched. And I thought, but if this is my time, I know where I'm going. So
Hmm.
I was reading the Bible, and so that really gave me a lot of strength to wait until I found out through her that actually the information I'd been given was inaccurate. And but she was always there. She was such a person of faith that she really reminded me that it was in God's hands and that
Hmm.
I was going to be okay.
Yeah. Those are encouraging words. She told you you're strong, you can do this. She just gave you encouragement and pointed to the Lord. I love that. And friends, if you're listening and you know someone that's ill or they're healing, remember this quote from Sheryl. I thought it was really poignant. It says, rediscovering the strength that comes from genuine connections and the loyal support from friends and colleagues makes the crucial difference in surviving and thriving through times of need. We need each other, friends. Reach out, pray for others, and be there along their side. And I loved what you said, Sheryl. We need to be our best advocate. I know this, you know this, your mother knew this. And so that just is impactful. So tell me a little bit, how did prayer impact this journey that you were on?
I actually should felt that the Lord was right there with me, and it
Mm,
was it wasn't a matter of setting aside a time to pray, but it was a continual prayer. And so I felt like I had a conversation with Christ, and
mhm,
it was an ongoing one. And I derived strength, and I derived courage. I derived a sense that I needed to trust Him and to let Him take care of the doctors so that they'd treat this infection, and that things would be in His control and they would work out the way they should, the way that
mhm.
the Lord had in mind for me.
Yeah. You know, I love your determination, and you can definitely tell that you've been an attorney and a judge. And I love the way that you talk to the doctors, and you were like, I need a date. I want a date. I need to know when I am leaving. You were already planning your life, and you hadn't even left yet. They did give you one. You still had to go back to the burn unit daily to have dressings changed, etc. But then, as we look on, and I'm so excited you were able to be released from the burn unit, then you were looking forward to your future. And get this, friends, she decides that she wants to begin running and do a marathon, not just one marathon, but several. Tell us a little bit about that drive that you had to do that.
Well, the morning that I was in the plane crash, I had run my 5 miles and I was thinking about running a marathon. And by that night, I was fighting for my survival. Um, but I had run a race the week before, the Bonnie Bell race, which somebody had captured a picture of me in my running outfit and sent it to the hospital. So my mother put it in a frame and put it on the bedstand next to me. Well, one of the nurses saw that and she said, "Who is that?" I said, "That's me. That was something that I wanted to do before this crash." And she said, "You can do it." She said, "Mark my words, in 2 years, you'll be able to run grandma's marathon and I'll be there cheering you on." And she was from Duluth. And so she gave me the hope and the inspiration and the motivation to set that as my goal. And so that's what made me start training in this full body suit, which was really warm because, you know, with burns, you don't your skin doesn't breathe. The only part of me that would perspire was my head.
Mm.
So I felt at times like I was burning up, but it was something that was really important to me to be able to. Um, I took it as a challenge. I took it as a challenge that she said within 2 years I'd be able to run that marathon. And a year and 11 months later, I was able to run Grandma's marathon. And a good friend of mine was Pat Miles, who had actually been broadcasting the news the night of my crash. And they hadn't released my name, but she just had a feeling it was me. Anyway, so I thought, you know, I knew that Pat had quit smoking, and I thought it would be great to have a running partner who was motivated to continue to remain healthy and to keep the weight off that she might be fearful of gaining. So I talked her into training for the race with me. Well, that was quite a summer. We trained hard. We trained through all the elements. We started when it was snowing, and we had quite a few experiences that were captured by the cameraman who Pat had accompany us, because she decided that if she was going to do this much training, she needed to capture the training and the marathon on film and do a special on it the week we were running the marathon. So we had cameramen following us the entire time. I remember one time there was a cameraman who was leaning outside of a car trying to capture our feet. You know, he was trying to be very artistic by capturing our feet. And he was leaning out the car door, holding the steering wheel with one hand, the camera with the other, and he didn't notice that there was a tree ahead. So
Oh,
he went flying. His camera, a precious camera, went on the ground. And, you know, we just had so many different experiences. But then the week of the marathon, she ran the series, and we actually both completed the marathon, and we had a little celebration at a restaurant up in Duluth.
and that was not your first race, though. You built up before you got a chance to get to Grandma's.
Right. We did Sit and Mai, which was a half marathon. Well, it's actually 17 miles. It's on the 17th of May, and that was in Grantsburg, Wisconsin. So that was about a month before Grandma's marathon. And before that, we'd done 10Ks and gradually built our distance up. Our speed wasn't so much it wasn't so much on our mind, but we'd go out for all day runs just to be able to get that distance in. And when
Yeah.
we go out for all day runs, sometimes we'd stop for a Dairy Queen en route because we were but it was quite an experience, and really feeling of satisfaction that I was able to do that.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah. I've done a half marathon. After the half, I was good. I didn't need to do a full marathon. But you weren't done. You did Grandma's, and then you decided to do the New York Marathon. You don't mess around at all. And so I admire that living full throttle in what you did with that, and all the people that were there watching and cheering you on. I love what you said in your book. After the New York Marathon, this is what you quoted. I'd learned to rely upon that inner voice that assured me I was on the right path, urging me to keep moving forward. In the end, both my training and my burn recovery taught me the importance of perseverance, self belief, and letting go of outcomes and trusting God. It was just a great relief for you. I love that. That's what I like about this book is every situation that came across your path in your life, you were able to take wisdom out of and learn from.
well, thank you. I think the one thing that really was important to me after that crash was to listen for that still small voice and to follow the Lord's lead, even if it didn't make sense to others. I resigned my judgeship when even my own family didn't understand why. But years later, because I'd resigned my judgeship, I was able to become Commissioner of Corrections and start the first faith-based unit in the state of Minnesota. So I remember Al Quee, who had appointed me judge, and I were at a prison fellowship luncheon, and I was speaking, and I looked down at him and I said, Al, maybe now you'll forgive me for stepping off the bench because I know judges are a governor's legacy. But I said the Lord had bigger plans for how we would work together. And he said, that's right. So he was at my side and we were able to launch that together. So listening for the Lord's lead and not asking why me, but what next was really an important part of my recovery.
You know, as a judge, I love what you talked about, where you explained that there's a balance between justice, which is important, and mercy. And you gave several examples of what that looked like. And I'd like to share one if I could. There was a man who was in front of you as a judge from stealing toys and food, and he had poverty issues. And as you spoke to him, you heard his story. And as he shared his story, the judgment that you gave him was that you were going to let it go this time if he can stay free from coming back into court for 6 months and not reoffend. And then on the side, you gave him some money so that he could go buy gifts for his family at the holidays. That just touched my heart. That's what Jesus did for us. He came out from around the bench of judgment and he saved us. And that just moved my heart. And it really shares with us as readers, Sheryl, who you are and what you've done. And that is a true balance between mercy and justice.
Well, thank you, Shug. Every year since that time, this gentleman's lawyer has sent me a Christmas card, and it's been 40 some years. And the Christmas card always reads the same. He always says, it wouldn't be Christmas until I sent this card to you. And he signs his name. I haven't seen that lawyer in all these years since I had that case, but he remembered it.
Yeah.
And it's just been a way in which it's touched my heart that it had such meaning for him and his client.
I'm sure the client, he'll never forget it. I mean, but that is the perfect example of what Christ has done for us. Um, Governor Jesse Ventura um, asked you to come in and talk about a position that he had in mind for you, and that was Commissioner of Corrections. And he asked you, what is the root cause that you felt at that time of recidivism? And you had mentioned, I think criminal behavior is driven by drugs, alcohol, mental illness, and it also plays a huge role, as does inadequate education in the absence of a moral compass. I've been in prison over 20 years, preaching with the women. We started a mentorship program 7 years ago, actually, where we walk with women inside a prison 6 months to a year prior to release, and we get to know them. We set up long-term goals, short-term goals. We talk about housing, transportation, trying to get reunited with their children, et cetera. Just trying to get them not to think in the criminogenic way, but instead to think about what my life could be. And it's our job as mentors to give them options. If you go down this road, this might happen. But if you go down this road, this might happen. And then we point to Christ through all of it because it is a faith-based program. And you talked about the programs that I have been involved in as well, Prison Fellowship Academy, Prison Fellowship Ministries. And what I didn't know was that Governor Jesse Ventura was the governor in office at the time that the first faith-based programming happened in Minnesota. Would you share with us a little bit of behind the scenes of what happened there and how you were instrumental in getting that put in place?
I'd be happy to. Well, I had done due diligence. I had gone to Washington to meet with Chuck Colson. I had gone with Al Quee down to Texas to see the faith-based prison that George Bush had started there, which was the first one that Prison Fellowship was involved with. And actually was on my way to Kansas with a legislative delegation to see their faith-based prison on 9/11 when our plane had to land because of the fact that the skies were cleared and we were in a state plane. So,
Wow.
I was doing due diligence. I was talking to legislators. I had some legislators Jen Olson, who was a state senator for one, who was very supportive. She was involved with Prison Fellowship and she would go to the prisons with me. So I I was convinced that changing hearts of stone to hearts of flesh could make all the difference in terms of that revolving door. And, as you know, a lot of times for women, the revolving door means it's not only them, but it's generational, that it's going
Mhm.
to affect their children. And that's the same thing with men. Um, so I, um, I wanted very much to have Minnesota adopt a faith-based prison approach. And I knew that Governor Ventura, the very weekend that I was approaching him about this faith-based prison to get his approval, had been quoted in Playboy magazine as saying religion is for the weak-minded. So it had gotten all sorts of publicity, but I had this plan that I wanted to get Governor Ventura away from his staff so that it was just him and me, and I could explain what due diligence I'd done. And the governor was really adamant about doing things that make a difference and that can be measured, that you can find measurable results. And I had the data to show that faith-based prisons could lead to measurable results and make a difference. So I invited him to go on the flight to the Rush City prison opening, and I knew there wouldn't be enough room for any of his staff, so I knew it would be my deputy, the pilot, and Governor Ventura and me. Well, this took a lot of thought on my part, and I have to say I had to overcome some resistance because it was my first flight in a small plane since my crash, and we were going in this small state plane. But the governor could not have been nicer. I reached up and took his hand and he said, "Don't worry." He said, I'll be with you throughout. He said, "My wife has a fear of flying and we'll be just fine." So we talked about the research I'd done. We talked about how a faith-based prison could end up with results that mattered, with a change of heart. And I asked for his permission to move forward. And he said, as long as nobody's forced into it, people have a choice and it produces measurable results, you can go for it. Well, I
Mhm.
was thrilled. That was the final thing I needed. I had legislative buy-in. I had already gone to various churches and talked to churches, and we had mentors lined up for helping with this program because that was a significant part of it. People would go into the faith-based program just before they were, like 2 years before they were going to be discharged from prison or released. And then they would be promised somebody to walk those last 2 years with them and then to help them find a church and to walk them back into the community. That was an important part. So we had everything in place. And as it turned out, it was very, very successful. I I was at Governor Quee's, I believe it was his 90th birthday party, and somebody dressed in a suit, African American gentleman, came rushing over to me holding his Bible. And I said, and he said, "Commissioner, Commissioner." Well, this was quite a few years after I'd been Commissioner of Corrections. So I knew that it was probably somebody who had been in prison, but I didn't remember him. He said, "Remember me?" He said, "I was in prison and I went through the first faith-based prison program." And he said, "And look at this. I'm still carrying the Bible that you and Governor Quee signed at that time." And he said, "I now have a business I'm running. I've married this beautiful woman and I'm solid in my faith." That was so heartwarming for me to actually see what it had meant to this man and how his life had changed as a result of it.
It's powerful. And friends, what most of you don't know is there's 2.2 million people approximately incarcerated today. 95% of those are going to get released. And within 3 years, 2/3 of those will reoffend in your own backyard. But get this, friends, if you mentor them, that drops down to approximately 8%, from 2/3 down to 8%. I mean, you can't beat the odds. And the amazing thing, I mean, it's so expensive to house inmates today. I think the last number I saw was around $60,000 per inmate per year. And so what an impact it would make. But not only that, you get to see changes, as you had mentioned, for generations to come, friends. And if you're interested in mentoring at all, please find us at himforher.org, HIM4her.org, or contact Prison Fellowship Ministries, a wonderful organization who I've spoken with often and preached with in different facilities and prisons across the country. The difference is that they also have Prison Fellowship Academy, where the women live and reside in there 24 hours a day. And that's what's so powerful about this, is that they learn about the Bible, what God wants for their life. They help turn their minds into a different direction, and that's unto the Lord. Again, it's voluntary. Our ministry is a little bit different, is that we walk with them 6 months to a year prior to release, meeting them one-on-one inside a prison, and then we walk with them when they get out. It is a big family of people who want those that are incarcerated to rise up and be the people that God had intended them to be. There's no bad ministry inside a prison, because we all want to work together for the goal of helping second chances. So I hope you guys will reach out to us and find us. And what you guys don't know is that Sheryl Ramstad was in office during the very first faith-based program for women inside a Shakopee prison. And that's, again, where my heart beats. So again, thank you for your hard work with Governor Jesse Ventura and all that you have done to change the impact and the direction that faith-based programming has had in prisons. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you for your comments, but I don't feel like, I mean, I know that others had such a great amount to do with the program, Alqui for one, and I know that the Lord was there with us. There would have been no other way. We had such resistance from prison guards about change, the unionized change, they didn't know what to expect. And now, 20 years later, it's a plum assignment. They all love being in the faith-based unit because there's a positivity that you just don't find in the rest of the prison. I now sit on the Minnesota Parole Board and went out to visit the first faith-based prison we had, and it just made my heart sing to see how these people have responded, and to hear their stories of faith, and to realize what they're doing for the entire prison community, serving as examples of changed behavior because they've changed their thinking and they've now turned their hearts toward Christ.
Yeah. And we've baptized almost 700 women over all the years up in Shakopee prison. And they always tell me, oh, Shug, the prison changes after the baptisms. Everybody's happy. Everybody's joyful. And of course, that does flip a switch later down the road, a couple weeks later, but it's so cool to see how God is working inside of the prison. I've had people come up to me years later and say, Shug, you're the one who baptized me. We baptized a lot of the women in Prison Fellowship Ministries Academy as well. They would come to our services and be baptized. It's just, I wish, friends, you could see that face coming up out of the water. And they come in one way and they lift up and rise up in Christ another. It's just so cool to see that they have hope. They have freedom inside of prison. And as you know, I'm getting on my soapbox. I'll get off now, but I just have such a joy with that. You had said in your book that I came to realize that my experience as a plane crash survivor and as a commissioner were linked. The journeys were both cathartic and highlighted the importance of giving people a second chance in life. And after I read that, I was so moved. But what did you do next? You decided you wanted to hike up what mountain? You wanted to go up Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, we don't have a lot of time to hear the details of that, but give us just a small appetite so that the women are going to want to get your book and read what happened during that climb.
Well, I did it to raise money because my view has been to those to whom much is given, much is expected. And I wanted to help raise money for Books for Africa, which places books in the hands of African children who don't have otherwise access to them. So I trained for a number of months to get used to the altitude. I went out to Breckenridge, which is the highest mountain that I could access in this country. I would, over the lunch hours, take bricks and put them in a backpack and climb the stairs of the Idea Center to get used to the idea that, I needed to be able to carry my load when I was doing it. And it was a wonderful opportunity to test my limits, because when I was out there it was a 5-day hike to the top, and there were times when I would lose my footing and I'd look down, and it was my faith that kept me going and that caused me to realize that I just needed to put one foot ahead of the other.
Yeah.
And so it was just it really gave me confidence in my trusting the Lord with my life. Again, a reminder that He was in charge and that I would be protected.
Yeah. Yeah. And, throughout the book, you talked about different things that would trigger your anxiety because of the plane crash. And a quote that you had given was, after you had climbed it, you said, "The triggers that once had the power to send me spiraling downward were now muted, their edges blunted. As I made my way up the mountain, I learned to trust myself again." And those were powerful, moving words. In summary, toward the end of the book, I enjoyed the quote that you said, "The past had laid a foundation of wisdom and resilience upon which I can build the next chapter of my life." You decided to leave your current position and go into nursing. And I love the fact that you wanted to go into nursing to help other burn victims, because you had been there, done that, and you could understand it now from a different perspective. And you were in your late 50s at the time. I wish we could talk about that a little bit more, but I want to save that for our listeners. I want them to pick up your book written by Sheryl Ramstad, and it's so powerful, called Living Life Full Throttle. Give us just a little taste about your new nursing career and how you experienced it.
I had been serving as a judge and started taking prerequisites for nursing as a second career because, as you say, I wanted to give burn survivors hope that there's life after burns. And so after 4 years of prerequisites, one at a time while I was working full-time as a judge, I got accepted into this program at the University of Minnesota. And I resigned my judgeship, which again, nobody would have understood. So I did it without telling anybody that I was going back to college full-time, because I felt led. I didn't want anyone to try to convince me otherwise. I felt like the Lord was leading me to do that. And one of the things that happened when I was on that path, I went back to the same burn unit that I had been a patient at. And in fact, I just last week went to a burn survivors picnic, and the first patient I came into contact with when I went back as a nursing student, I thought I was going to faint. I grabbed the door as I was walking out, and one of the nurses who had taken care of me came over and said, "Sheryl, why are you doing this?" And I said, "I just feel like I really need to be here. I'm being led to do this."
Was that the man who was filling his lawnmower and the gas
No,
exploded?
this
Oh,
was a man who was burned by and was an electrical fire. No,
electrical fire. Okay.
the man who you're talking about had the gas can blow up, and he threw himself in front of it between him and his 3-year-old grandson who was there to protect him.
Wow.
And I had
Wow.
been helping him for quite a long time. I also was doing burn support groups, and one evening his wife came to a support group with him, and she came over to me afterwards and she said, "We want to thank you for what you've done to help." And she said, "I know about your plane crash." She said, "Your plane almost hit our house. It came into our neighborhood, and she said, I was going to church at that very church where you collapsed in front of. And it was interesting because it was one of those full circle moments where the Lord spoke to me by saying, this is the path I want you to be on. You're now giving back to people who were there when you could have had another outcome. And I just felt really affirmed that I was doing something that I needed to be doing. So I've always had a heart, I will always have a heart for burn survivors and always do anything that I can for them.
Wow. Full circle is what that is. Just full circle. You guys, I can't encourage you enough to please pick up Living Life Full Throttle by Sheryl Ramstad. It will move your heart. It'll get you motivated. It'll get you excited to live your life full throttle. Do you have any words of wisdom for us as we close, Sheryl?
Well, we all have adversity, and it comes in various forms, but we all have hurdles that we have to go over. And I think so often the tendency is to say, why me? But I would encourage people to say, what next? To look beyond and to say, this isn't going to be the end of me. I've got more reason that I'm going to do things for others. I turned survival into service. And that for me it gave me purpose in so many different ways. And I think that others would do well to just say, what next?
Well, lean into the Lord, friends. Ask God, pray, and He will direct your steps. Sheryl Ramstad, thank you very much. It was an honor to have you on our show. Please come back again sometime and give us an update. I hope you do.
Thank you so much for the privilege of being on the program with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reaching out. It was really a joy. Friends, we are himforher.org. Please find us. Please donate. Please help us mentor and walk alongside women inside a prison as well as this radio show. I'm Shug Bury. You know I love you. Over and out.